Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. AJ Lawson is one of the Timberwolves' two-way contract signees this season. He's somewhat of a man of mystery playing in the G League last year and starting this summer for the Dallas entry in the Las Vegas Summer League. Today we'll talk to Sean Woodley of Locked On Raptors, who called play-by-play for some of AJ Lawson's games in the Canadian Pro League earlier this year. We'll learn all about AJ Lawson today. Plus, the Timberwolves have signed Nate Knight to a full contract, not a two-way deal, a full contract. We'll break down what that means for the roster and the salary cap here in just a little bit. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. A packed show today. First of all, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, you can find this show wherever you listen to podcasts, free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms from Apple to Google, Spotify to Odyssey and beyond. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at B Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. Upcoming on the show here in just a minute, we're going to talk to Sean Woodley from Locked On Raptors. As I mentioned a minute ago, he called a bunch of AJ Lawson's games. Of course, Lawson, the new Timberwolves, actually, as of now, the only two-way contract signee for the Timberwolves. He called a bunch of his games in the Canadian Pro League. We'll learn a bit more about Lawson's game beyond what I was able to share last week, which frankly was based on Summer League play and G League stats and college stats. Sean Woodley knows a lot more about AJ Lawson than I do. So we're going to have Sean on the show here in just a little bit. First, we should talk about Nate Knight. Nate Knight signed with the Timberwolves on Sunday. And of course, the Wolves had previously extended the qualifying offer for a two-way contract. Nate, of course, was on a two-way deal last year with the Wolves. The year prior, he was on a two-way deal with the Atlanta Hawks and actually played rotation minutes, played a little in the playoffs with the Hawks a couple of years ago. When he was pressed into service last year, mostly during the COVID-19 outbreak in December, January for the Wolves, he played fairly well. He was arguably the best pound-for-pound rebounder on the Timberwolves. Probably he and Jared Vanderbilt sharing those honors, I would say. But now Nate Knight is back on a partially guaranteed 2-year contract with the Wolves. Basically this season it's partially guaranteed, which is basically what the Wolves did with Jalen Noel, Naz Reid in past years, and Josh Minott. We'll talk more about his contract later. Actually, Minott is actually fully guaranteed this year. But that's another topic. But I want to focus on the Knight deal. So this year's partially guaranteed. Next year's a team option. So the Wolves could opt out of this deal. They could waive him at some point this season and only owe part of the salary, or they could keep him, into next year, or they could, split the difference there, and perhaps they let him go in the offseason when the team option comes up. But Nate Knight likely will play pretty exclusively the four on this team, a team already with Rudy Gobert, Karl-Anthony Towns, and Naz Reid still on the roster, barring, I thought it was possible the Wolves could trade Naz Reid for a pick or something at some point this offseason. And assuming that doesn't happen at this point, which it still could, Nate Knight's not going to play at the 5 really ever, because Rudy or Towns will likely be on the floor at almost all times. And Naz has a little more size than Nate Knight and is more likely to play the 5 than Knight. I think Knight has a little bit more of a consistent, versatile offensive game than Naz, even if Naz occasionally has more wow moments. I think Nate Knight is more of a grinder, and there are things that he does better that fit better at the 4 than Naz Reid. So all that to say, Nate Knight signs a 2-year deal with a partial guarantee this season, team option for next year, and he will be on the roster. I want to talk about on Tuesday's show, I want to talk about the rest of the roster, the breakout of the Josh Minott deal, the Austin Rivers deal. Some of those details came a little more clear over the weekend. So I want to talk about the existing roster, the payroll, et cetera. That's going to be more of a Tuesday conversation. I want to leave enough room here today for Sean Woodley from Locked On Raptors to talk about AJ Lawson. So learn all about the Wolves' currently only two-way player. They still got a slot available for a two-way deal. So we're going to talk to Sean here right now. All right, as promised, I'm joined by Sean Woodley from Locked On Raptors. Sean's joining us today not to talk about the Raptors, unless you really want to, Sean. I guess you could. But we're going to talk about AJ Lawson, the Timberwolves' newest and actually only two-way contract signee at this point. Sean, you have a bit of a background covering him up there in Canada. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do play-by-play and a studio show each week for the Canadian Elite Basketball League, which is the top pro league up here in Canada. It's like a summer sort of extended league. It's not quite as informal as like the tournament or something like that. It's not quite, a regular season in the G League or anything like that. It's kind of in between. And it's a league that's mostly for Canadians. And, they have roster stipulations. 60% of all rosters for each game have to be Canadians. You got to have 2 Canadians on the floor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you've ever, heard of the Canadian Football League, the CFL, it's basically the basketball version of that. And so, yeah, I got to watch AJ Lawson this season. He played 10 games for the Guelph Nighthawks of the CEBL. I called, I think, 5 or 6 of his games doing play-by-play, and he's a blast to watch, man. I'm really, really glad to see that he's landed with the Wolves.
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about him last week on the show, and it was really just what I could find. Some summer, he played very well for the Dallas Mavericks in Las Vegas Summer League, so it was some highlights from there. It was college stats, but I guess generally, tell Timberwolves fans, tell the listeners, what should we expect from AJ Lawson? What type of a player is he? What are kind of the high points when it comes to Lawson?
So, being the hacky play-by-play guy that I am, I actually came up with a nickname for AJ Lawson and one of his other teammates. This guy, Sean Moore, another Canadian guy. I think he played for Grand Canyon State or something like that, for those Grand Canyon State heads out there. But either way, him and AJ Lawson kind of worked as sort of the outlets in transition for Guelph. And Guelph this season really kind of made their bones as a transition team. Not the greatest half-court offense, but on the run, they were fantastic. And it was AJ Lawson and Sean Moore, who I dubbed the Flash Brothers because of how fast they are. That was kind of the whole story of AJ Lawson's time with the Guelph Nighthawks this year. He was one of the best Canadians in the league, and this is a league where a lot of the top Canadians who you see on the national team and things like that will play in the summer. And he was, had he played the full season, I probably would have voted him Canadian of the Year, which is one of the awards that the league hands out. And really just watching him scream down the wings. He was a fantastic catch and shoot guy, nice guy on the side where you can kind of swing it to him and you can work it and he can sort of attack a closeout. That was sort of the stuff you were seeing from AJ Lawson. Really disruptive defensively, forced a lot of steals, and he was able to sort of occupy a role, which gives me some hope that he can slot into an NBA team someday in terms of not having to have the ball in his hands. Sometimes in this league, you get guys who are, like the best players on their team their entire lives. They go to the NBA, it doesn't quite work out because they can't quite adapt, so they come to the CEBL, and they're allowed to be sort of on ball and sort of are kind of given the room to spread their wings there. But with Guelph, one of the guys on their team was actually AJ Lawson's teammate at College Park last year in the G League, Cat Barber, who played a couple NBA games this year with the Hawks and was one of the best players in the CEBL last year. He made second team All G League, and so that's Cat Barber's team. That dude runs pretty much everything that's going on in the offense there, and AJ Lawson worked so well off of Cat Barber, cutting baseline. Again, like I said, running in transition, really getting that running attack going for Guelph. It was really, really cool to see him kind of find that role, and that's why in the NBA, he doesn't have to have the ball in his hands to be successful. He can hit a catch and shoot three. He can leak out for an outlet pass and kind of get you going on the run. And that's really sort of what I think Wolves fans can look for from AJ Lawson.
Yeah, and that was one of my principal questions was, is he going to be an op? Obviously, he was at South Carolina for college ball, and they were not good. I think they won like 4 games his last year there. But he was scoring because, he was probably the lone NBA prospect on that team and scored almost 17 points a game. The 3-point shooting percentages you mentioned, he was a good catch and shoot guy in the Canadian League. And those numbers across the board, he played a little bit in the G League last year, were good enough on pretty high volume. They were basically league average type, 35, 36%, kind of in that range. So that was one of my questions is can he be maybe even a 3-and-D type player? And it also seems like, I guess the second part of that is, it seems like he's mostly, I think he's listed as a guard, but it feels like after initiating a lot of offense early in his college career, he's probably more of a 2-3, maybe more 3, can even play, some small ball 4 potentially. I know the rebounding numbers aren't great, but it seems like he could be more of like a wing, a bigger wing that could be a good screener. He did a lot of that in Summer League. So I guess I kind of asked you a lot of questions at once there, but basically, can he be that 3-and-D type wing player at the NBA level?
Yeah, I mean, he's going to have to improve the shooting to like a base level, I think. He was only
Yeah.
like 33% in the CEBL this year,
Okay.
which isn't terrible or anything like that. But, that's obviously something you want to take up if you're going to be a meaningful NBA player. I think
Right.
I'm with you that sort of the 2-3, 3-and-D style player is probably what you're looking for. On offense, I do think there's some juice there. And I
Okay.
think he's a more sort of well-rounded offensive player than he is on defense, where, he's a little bit slight, up against bigger bodies in the NBA. I could see him struggling against sort of bigger wing types, but he's long, he's quick, he can certainly guard guards, I would say. And yeah, the sort of 2-3 is where I would probably slot him in. Probably more traditionally a 2, with some bench lineups for that Wolves team. You could totally see him kind of work in there in a pinch, the way two-way guys tend to. But yeah, the shooting is sort of going to be the key factor, right? He was really, really great down in Summer League, and it was awesome to see him kind of flourish. And I am curious to see if that's just sort of something he kind of builds upon. This is a guy who improved even in the 10 games he played in the CEBL from game 1 to game 10. It was like noticeable. And actually, I caught up with his coach, Charles Kissy of the Guelph Nighthawks, but at a game they were playing recently, and I was calling it. And this was just after AJ had gone down for a workout with the Mavericks before Summer League, just to kind of do his medicals and all that stuff to get himself ready to go. And he had just come back. He was playing in his first game back. And I asked the coach, like, hey, so like, what's AJ doing? How was the workout? He's like, dude came back 3 days ago, hasn't missed a shot. Like it gave him like some new sort of like fire as a player just to get that NBA look. And he carried that over to Summer League. I did not expect him to be as good as he was in Summer League. But, really awesome to see it. And, the steady progression. It does feel like he's kind of a guy who I wonder if, because of the timing of his career, with the COVID, sort of, compressing seasons, hurting development. I wonder if he's the type of guy who, now that he's getting to actually play some consistent basketball, maybe that leads to some development that maybe didn't get a chance to happen when he was in college because his season was compressed.
Back to Sean here in just a second as we talk about AJ Lawson. First, let's talk about our title sponsors of today's show, and that, of course, is BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the number one online source for odds, lines, and games. You can find reviews and news of every single league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL combat sports. Sometimes the NHL is a combat sport, esports, and even golf. By the way, there are plenty of NBA futures. There are win totals out there on BetOnline. Trust me, right now, the number at betonline.net for the Timberwolves over-under is a tasty number if you want to bet the over. It's a little lower than I think it'll ultimately settle out here in several weeks. I'm not going to make those predictions yet on the show. That's coming later, really in the fall as we lead into training camp in the season. But go check that out. Also, NFL preseason, we're like 2 weeks away from the first preseason game, which is crazy. It's all over there at betonline.net. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sport wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. Yeah, and I think his, there's kind of two different types of two-way guys, and I guess I'm generalizing here, but it's the upside plays that maybe the undrafted guys who have upside, and then it's plug and play guys like you mentioned who could play in a pinch, and the Wolves did a little both of that last year with Nate Knight, who now actually just signed this weekend to an NBA deal, and then last year McKinley Wright, who is very much an upside guy. He's not in the organization anymore. And now that the Wolves are thinking like, hey, we could be a top 4 seed in the West, we're going to be a second round team at least. They're looking for more of these plug and play type guys. And you look at the Wolves backcourt, they don't have a ton of size in the backcourt. I mean, D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards, obviously, but
Mhm.
Jordan McLaughlin, Jalen Noel, even Bryn Forbes and Austin Rivers is I guess more average sized, but that's the depth. Those are the 6 guys in the backcourt. So adding somebody who could potentially play the 2, I guess you've got Wendell Moore Jr., the rookie, but he's also maybe more of a 3 than he is a 2, and he's not obviously going to be in the rotation. But some more depth with some size, I think, is important. And also going back to like the Wolves they only have 2 real point guards on the roster in D'Angelo Russell and Jordan McLaughlin. And I don't think at all that they're signing AJ Lawson to like be the 3rd point guard. But when I did some digging, like he played point guard his freshman year at South Carolina, and that was like a 500-ish team. And
Mhm.
his assist rate was crazy. And it seems like he at least has that in his, like he's done it before, right? So like in a pinch, he could initiate offense. He could be somebody that could handle the ball a little bit. Even if that's not like ultimately his NBA, path, but part of me wonders if it's the size, and then also just kind of like somebody who has that experience. He should be more well-rounded as a player, should be a pretty high basketball IQ, somebody who works hard, can be a plug and play type guy. Is that kind of what you see him, at least at first in the NBA, is plug and play in whatever role they need him in?
Yeah, I mean, I think the defense will kind of tell. It's hard, right? I haven't seen him play against NBA offenses
Right.
before, so it's hard to really tell because the CBL has good players, but they don't have LeBron James or anything
Right.
like
Yeah.
that. Maybe one day that'd be fun. It would certainly help my day to day. But yeah, no, I think the skills he does have are pretty refined, right? And you mentioned the playmaking. I mean, he averaged 3 assists a game with Guelph this season, despite playing on a team with two high usage ball handlers and sort of shot creators in Cat Barber and then Ahmed Hill, another sort of G League guy who's kind of been around. Those two guys really sort of carry the day offensively. They're going to run most of the half court stuff. And AJ Lawson still found his way to 3 assists a game. A lot of that in transition, and a lot of that again, kind of attacking on a second side when the sort of defense is shifting. He's so quick. He can put the ball on the deck. He's pretty dexterous. Like, he's got a decent handle for his size. I do think there's a little bit there. You're never going to ask him to run 10 pick and rolls a game for you or anything like that. But if you run a D'Angelo Russell, Rudy Gobert pick and roll, and maybe that fizzles out and you need to sort of find something else new, maybe Karl-Anthony Towns or Anthony Edwards are on the bench, AJ Lawson can be that sort of fourth or fifth guy who can make an extra play and keep the offense flowing. He's probably not going to come in and average 15 a game or anything like that, but if he's asked to be out there and play some games, probably something's gone wrong for the Wolves, I would say. Like, if your two-way guys are playing, that's never like the greatest thing in the world,
Yeah.
but I do think there is enough there in terms of his like touch for the game, his overall sort of awareness, and just the athleticism he brings, where he could certainly slide in and probably do some pretty good things for you right away, where he's got that refinement. It's not like he's a totally raw product with nothing figured out. There's still some growth to be done, but I certainly think he could slide in a pinch and do some good things for you.
Yeah, and that secondary kind of action within an offense, the ability to, like, the ball swings back around, the first option is not there, and you can pump fake, put the ball on the floor. That's what the Wolves have been trying to get Jaden McDaniels to do, and he did a bit more of that last year. And obviously, there's a ton of upside there. And so that type of a player who's not simply catch and shoot, or not simply somebody who needs the ball in their hands like a Jordan McLaughlin, who's a point guard through and through, but somebody who can do a little bit of both, and has the ability to at least put some pressure on the defense, even if it's not at an Anthony Edwards level, but like somebody who could also do that off the bench, like you said, because even if he's getting run, it's surely off the bench, and it's surely in a situation where they really need him to play, and then he's going to need the ability to create as well. I guess last question, Sean.
Yeah.
I mean, he's still fairly young. I mean, he just
He's
one
22,
year. Yeah, still 1 year out of college. He only played 3 years at South Carolina. Is there some upside there? Could he be like a true rotation guy in a couple of seasons? Do you think? I know that's a really difficult question to answer, but like, based on what you've seen, a pretty well-rounded player, is this somebody who, like, a year from now we could be having? Nate Knight played last year on a two-way. I guess he spent the year prior in the NBA too on a two-way with the Atlanta Hawks. But is he somebody who, like, in a year, we're looking at the Wolves trying to fill out a roster where they're in a salary cap crunch and they need a minimum guy? Is he somebody that could have an upside as a rotation player in the NBA?
I think like the offense and transition stuff certainly gives me a lot of hope. Again, I think it's going to depend on the 3-point shot being something better than 35%, sort of his career average if you put everything in aggregate. And it should be said, his 33% sample with the Guelph Nighthawks is just 10 games, right? So it's not like a huge, massive sample. And I think like the defense will, when you have Rudy Gobert on your team, you can probably get away with having a little bit less defense on the wings. Maybe not in the playoffs if you look at the Utah Jazz, but, regular season wise, if you're trying to skate by, for sure, I think it can be playable. And again, he's 22, he's 6'7", he's long, he's super athletic. There's no reason he can't be a good defender, whether he's a guy who can guard the best wing on an opposing team. I mean, that's not something you get all the time, let alone from a two-way spot, right? So I doubt that's kind of his future, but as sort of a guy you can, kind of hide off ball, he can go and be a bit of a passing lane disruptor because he is so quick and he can get out on the run, kind of drive those high event defensive plays for for you, as opposed to being sort of a dude you can just stick on a guy and ask him to guard him for 60 possessions. That's probably not going to be it. But certainly, I think with what he's shown, and again, that sort of capacity for growth, and the fact that he just, like, as a dude, seems like he's like very committed to this whole being a professional basketball player thing. And I know all these guys are, but just in talking with his coaches and talking with, guys around him and just watching him play this season and the steady growth you saw just as he got regular run, I certainly think that in a couple of years' time, you could look at AJ Lawson and say, yeah, that's a totally reasonable ninth man or something like that. I don't want to get too crazy because, it's a lot. The CEBL has now graduated 6 different players to NBA deals, and no one's really gone and sort of taken it, although Lindell Wigginton was like top 5 for MVP at Summer League. He was last year's Canadian of the Year in the CEBL. So, there's certainly a pathway there now, and these are talented players. This is a talented league. So, yeah, I wouldn't be stunned if AJ Lawson kind of grows into some sort of rotation piece, considering, like, he was a guy I wanted the Raptors to take with one of their second-round picks in the 2021 draft where they got Scotty Barnes. I was like, hey, why not AJ Lawson too? That sounds like fun. And he kind of, in theory, fits a lot what the Raptors want to do as well. So maybe they, regret that one a little bit. But, considering he had the draft pedigree, there's no reason why he can't find himself into the back end of a rotation for sure.
Awesome. That's great. Frankly, a player I didn't know much about at all when they signed him. So this is really good insight. And I definitely appreciate it. Appreciate you coming on, Sean.
Of course, man. Anytime.
Oh, and also, I guess, let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me Locked On Raptors every day. Check that out. Talking Raptors, as the title suggests, implies. Same deal as anyone who's listening to Locked On Wolves. Exact same deal over there, but for the Raptors. You can also, if you want to, you can watch CEBL games for free in the States. They have the CEBL app and the CEBL Plus. You can go and subscribe. The games are free. Just make an account and you can watch games anywhere. And they're a lot of fun. It's a good league. They also got J. Cole in there at one point earlier this year, too. So they have famous people. They have good basketball players. Former Raptor Jalen Harris is in there. Former Iowa Wolves are all over the place. Brandon Sampson is like the second leading scorer in the league this year. I know he played for the Wolves last year. So lots of fun little, I remember that guys that you'll get when you watch a CBL game. Plus you get to hear me call games from time to time.
I like all that. I love the guys that, like, there's so many of those players, and Sampson's one of those where, like, I see the name and I'm like, I know who that is. Why? And I can't place it. And It feels like a little bit like Summer League in that regard, I guess. But
100%. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on, Sean. Really appreciate it.
Of course, man.
All right, a big thanks to Sean from Locked On Raptors for coming on the show. Go check out Locked On Raps at any time, but especially heading into Wolves-Raptors games this year. Of course, we only see Toronto a couple times this season, so go check that out. Sean does a fantastic job over there. They have a great YouTube channel as well. Really, the rest of this week, I want to focus on the current payroll situation, some rotation predictions, but really with the Josh Minott contract details coming out, some kind of in the weeds details on the Austin Rivers contract, some weird partial guarantees there. I want to break all that down, the impact on roster spots, number one, and then also the payroll and moving forward what the rest of the offseason could look like. Are there any more moves coming? What might happen, with the Nate Knight signing? Likely there's no DeMarcus Cousins, no Boogie signing the rest of this offseason. So we'll break all that down on Tuesday's show. And then we'll look at the rotation, some predictions there the rest of this week. We get into August, we'll move to 3 shows per week. But the rest of this week, we're daily, Monday through Friday still, as we kind of put the bow on the most active part of the offseason and we move into, I guess, something of a basketball purgatory is maybe not the right word, but something of a wasteland in August. But there's still plenty to talk about related to the Wolves. It's going to be an exciting season for Minnesota. We'll do some look backs. We'll do some player season predictions and previews. We'll have some guests throughout August. So it's going to be a ton of fun. Make sure that you're following and subscribe to this show wherever you listen to podcasts. Of course, you can find us anywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. That includes really everywhere, but Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey, all the big ones, all the small ones, whatever you like to listen to shows, you can find us. And a big thank you for making us your first listen each and every day. It's greatly appreciated. You can also follow the show account on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T, and at B Beecken. That's with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. That's all we have for today. Again, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on the biggest stories. And as long as you're making us your first listen, don't forget to make your second listen the Locked On NBA show. You can get up to date on the latest news and rumors in the NBA in just 30 minutes every day with Locked On NBA. Locked On NBA is your daily NBA update in just 30 minutes. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.